Hey folks, today we're going to do something really useful. It's not a painting of its own, but it is something that's going to help you with your paintings, and that's this 5-step value scale. So we're going to create one of these. I'm going to show you how you can use it, and it'll be really useful in the future. So let's get started on that. Our 5-step value scale really is quite easy to make. All you need is a scrap piece of watercolor paper. You're going to need a ruler to mark off some measurements on that piece of paper, a pencil to draw some lines. At the end of all of this, you're going to want to be putting in some holes in your value scale so you can look through it. But it's really easy to set up. The first thing we'll do is actually mark off some lines. I want to put some rectangles in here that are essentially 1 inch wide by 1.5 inches tall. I've already ticked it off, but what you're going to want to do is measure 1.5 inches from the bottom edge on each side of your paper, and then draw one horizontal line right there. You could use a Sharpie for this. I'm using a good actually it's a 3B pencil. It makes a nice dark line, and it won't lift up when I get water on there with the paint. And then I've marked off actually 2 tick marks, each 1 inch wide in this direction. So I've got a set along each one of those inch marks. And I'm going to draw that line. Essentially that becomes a vertical line between the bottom edge and the horizontal line that we drew just a little bit earlier. So that, again, I end up with these 5 long rectangles that I will paint my different values in and turn it into my value scale. So that's how you start. It really doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to get this nice set of 5 steps where you're going to be able to put values in and use them for a value scale. And now we paint them in. You can use Payne's Gray if you have that. If you don't have that, you can use a mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. That's what I'm using. I don't have Payne's Gray. And I mix it into a very nice neutral gray color. And I start, the easiest way to do this really is just to make layers. So I start with 1 layer of gray. This one is light because my first gray step of gray, so I have my white step here, my first step of gray, I want it to be very light, at the very light end of the value scale. And I paint the layers in. It just makes it easier actually to build up the values that I need, especially for the middle and the dark gray. So we'll dry that, and then we'll come back and we'll continue to paint these step by step, and we'll have our value scale and we'll finish it up. Here's my next layer. Again, just another layer of gray. I start, though, at the middle rectangle. I leave this one alone. I want that color to stay the way it is. Start at the middle rectangle. Another layer of gray which will dry, and then we'll finish up with the last layer, the last rectangle of gray, and then our black. Now our dark gray square, and we'll layer over what's going to be our black square as well. As you're developing these grays, you want to make sure that they're really significantly different, that there's a real visual difference between this and this and that. And I think I'm running a little bit short on paint on my palette here, so I'm going to have to get some more, but I think this one is maybe not quite dark enough, so I'm going to get another little bit more color in there just to get that to be a really dark gray when I've finished. I have a pretty good light gray and a pretty good medium. I think I just need a good dark gray in here. So a little bit more color. I think that'll serve, and we'll dry this and we'll finish up by getting our black square done. And our last step is to get the darkest dark on our value scale. This should really be black, or as close to black as you can make it. So I've got a lot of color on here. It's actually not color, it's gray. So I have a lot of gray on here, and that's to build it up to the point where that square looks very, very dark, if not completely black. Once you've finished up, you should have something that looks like this. The value changes don't have to be consistent from one to the other. You just really need 3 different values in those grays, and a really dark, and of course the white of the paper. Our last step really is to punch holes in it. Punching holes in it will actually make it more useful. So you get your hole punch out and you punch a little hole in each one of those different steps of value, like that. So then you have this to work with, and it's very useful. It'll help you see values both in the paintings that you're working on and in the subjects that you might be trying to paint. So my value scale will come in really handy in judging the values that I have in my painting. Now when you compose your painting, you're probably going to decide ahead of time where you want to have your light areas and your dark areas and your middle value areas. So having a value scale like this will really help. If you place it down, your value scale with the holes in it, down on your painting, you can figure out exactly what values you've got, or at least close to what values you've got in your painting. Here in the foreground of this little study of water and reflections, I can put my value scale down and see that I've got my water. It's a little bit darker than the first step of value I have here, but it's a little bit lighter than that. So it really sits kind of between those two in terms of value. If I go to one of the darker areas, maybe back here in the trees, I can take a look at that area and see that that area of the trees is certainly darker than white. And actually it's really darker than, most of it is actually really darker than my first step of grayscale. And it's even darker than this one. So to find where that value lies, you really have to go down to our last step of gray to see that it's actually a little bit darker than that step of gray, although it's not quite black. So if you take a look, you can see that. So that's how this value scale will really come in handy in helping you make certain that you've got the values that you want in your painting, the values that you plan to be there once you've got the color on.